You are listening to a broadcast of the First Congregational United Church of Christ, Phoenix.
Okay, if I can have everybody's attention for a minute, and we have spared no expense in bringing our speaker today from far away, and clear up here in another land somewhere. But before that, would someone care to lead us in a short grace before the meal?
We'll have our talk first, and then we'll have you.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, someone think about volunteering. And
I volunteered, Judy.
We have someone with credentials. Anyway, I want to be sure and say hello to Rowena, who is watching this program by way of some sort of an electronic device that I have no idea what it is or how it works. But anyway, we're here and Rowena is there and she gets to enjoy the program. Maybe someone will bring you some of the food.
Yes.
She's in Gilbert, and it's a 40-minute drive.
Oh my.
So without any further ado, I don't really think I need much of an introduction. I think everybody knows Judy. I did tell her, though, that I was making the introduction and I could be bribed.
Oh!
But she didn't make an offer, so the heck with it. So our speaker today is Judy, who is going to talk to us about cult.
Thank you, Gene, for that gracious introduction. If there's anybody that can't hear me, please let me know. I can talk louder. I've been informed that for the podcast, I should be in the vicinity of right about here. Because if I get any closer, the camera gets a good view of the inside of my nose, which you don't want to see. We're going to be talking about religious cults today, but before we do that, let's just talk about the idea of a cult in general. Can anybody think of a group of people that might be called a cult that's not necessarily religious?
Well, not gypsies, are they? That a cult?
No, that's a lifestyle.
How about the Tea Party?
The Tea Party? That's political. That's
okay.
Political, but what about,
it's not religious.
What about people that use Mac computers?
Oh.
What about people that go wear costumes and go to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show at midnight?
Yeah.
Those are examples of cult-like groups of people that have a shared interest. But we're going to be talking about religious cults.
Now,
religious cults.
before you go further, do we need to turn off any lights?
Do we need to turn off any light?
No.
No. No, it would be the ones
Trying
in
to
the
get
it would be the ones in the front.
We can
But
see
can
it
you
well.
see these okay?
Yeah.
If there's one you can't see, let me know.
Robert was dead.
Yeah,
Robert
needs to use
or
the
Susan
chair.
could use the chair.
No, the ones on the edge.
I could do that too, couldn't I?
There.
But
Those
I
are
can
the heat
also see
producing
the
ones.
ones.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to be talking about religious cults, about the world of religious cults, the good and the bad, and what's the difference. But let's start by talking about what is a cult. Now, the word cult comes from a French word which means to worship or give reverence to a deity. And there's an anonymous quote here, a cult is a church down the street from yours. And you may be able to think of some. But the original meaning of the word cult can be applied to any religious group. It can be applied to Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Roman Catholics, United Church of Christ followers. That the original meaning is to worship or give reverence to a deity.
Judy,
Yes.
to be a cult, don't they have to be guided kind of like by a book that supersedes the Bible?
Did everybody hear the question?
No.
To be a cult, doesn't the group need to be guided by a book?
Some kind of a book.
A book?
Or a person that supersedes the Bible.
Or what we might call sacred scriptures. We're going to get into the attributes of a cult. But there are a lot of cults in the world today. We'll be talking about good ones and bad ones, and what are the attributes, so that when people talk to us about cults, we'll be able to distinguish the difference. So let's start with what a cult is. It's a small religious group that exists in tension with the predominant religion.
Intention.
Hinduism might be considered a cult in North America. Christianity might be considered a cult in India. It's a religious group that is in tension with the predominant religion. A cult can also be a small and recently created organization which is headed often by a single charismatic ruler and is viewed as spiritually innovative. Can you think of an example? Christianity, yes.
Christ and the 12 apostles.
Christ, one leader, 12 disciples, and a small group of followers. You know, we recently had, oh my word, the word just went, Pentecost. I'm in an older church, did I tell you It's getting. We recently had Pentecost, and if you remember, all the followers of Jesus were in one room. They were from all over the world, and they were all in one room when the Holy Spirit came. Does anybody remember what the number of people were in that room? It's very specific in the Bible. 120. 120 people. Now, the resurrected Christ appeared to more than 400 people. But at the time when the Holy Spirit came on Pentecost, it was 120. So it's a small, worldwide, when you think about it, that's a small group of followers. Cults can be either destructive or benign. Benign cults are any group of people who have a set of beliefs and rituals that are not mainstream. And these cults, people can come and go. You can show up at their church one day, and you can leave just as easily. That's part of a benign cult. Another aspect of a benign cult is you get full disclosure of the group's doctrine and practices. You can see in the newspaper what Roman Catholics believe. You can look on the web and you'll see all of the things that we believe in the United Church of Christ. You can not podcast, but stream. You can stream General Synod, which is coming up at the end of this month, and see exactly what we're talking about and what we're arguing about and what we believe. So that's an aspect of benign cult, full disclosure. Can you think of an instance where you've heard of a group that doesn't give full disclosure?
The Mormons and their secret, the stuff that they have in the temple, like if you're not a Mormon, you can't go to a Mormon wedding in the temple.
Yes, do you remember Kelly Hallstrom,
right,
who was not able to go to her daughter's wedding because she was not a member of the Mormon faith? Another attribute is you can come and go without fear of harassment.
That didn't apply to Jim Jones' cult.
No kidding.
So his was destructive.
Yeah. Yes. We'll be talking more about specific cults, good and bad, and what they believe. Now, a destructive cult, perhaps you recognize these people, and we'll talk a little bit more about them. Sydney Malthorpe and Elizabeth Clare Prophet. They both headed destructive cults, and we'll talk a little bit about their cults. You're actually more familiar with them than you realize. But a destructive cult uses mind control. A destructive cult uses psychological coercion to recruit, indoctrinate, and retain members. Yes, that's I hear some kiddies talking about Jim Jones over there. It forms an elitist society. We're going to heaven, nobody else is. We have special knowledge. Our leader, a lot of turning around over there. It's all his fault. No, it's mine.
You keep coming
It's
too
mine because
close.
I'm walking around. I'm making you crazy. This is the beauty of podcasting. You get to see how it really is.
She's my sister-in-law. She's allowed to drive me crazy.
A destructive cult also has a founder who is self-appointed, dogmatic, messianic, charismatic, and unaccountable. Unaccountable. That's the big one. Well, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it. He's probably the most familiar to you. He had in Heaven's Gate. Oh. The Hale Bob comment. You remember Haley Bob? Oh. And the final thing is, it's not the final yet. They believe the end justifies the means in raising funds and in recruitment. They will do anything to recruit you. The end justifies the means.
Kind of makes me think of Scientology.
Kitty's mentioning Scientology. Yeah. There's another example, and we'll talk about whether or not we think that's benign or dangerous.
In the movie Amway.
Amway. You have a really good point there, but it's not a religious cult, as far as I know. I could be wrong. I do know somebody that sells Amway, and it could be religious. But the final thing is, and I think for us as members of the United Church of Christ, and people who are trying every day to be good Christians, this final point is very important. A destructive cult does not use its wealth to benefit either its members or society. Oh. They're gathering in. They have a charismatic leader that rides around in a Rolls Royce. And you get to go barefoot.
And have big houses.
And they have big houses, and I think you're beginning to think about something.
Really, when the people who run these destructive cults agree with this?
I think we might argue with them, but, well, I don't know. That's a really good question. I think they would argue, particularly with the bottom. Yeah, that they are benefiting society, but I'm not sure. There's a book out right now about Scientology, about and I'm trying to think of the name of it because I'm reading another book actually about Fred Phelps' church, about a woman that escaped from there, and that's called Vanished. But the one about Scientology that's written by a woman that escaped. When you read that, you can see that some of these things are a little subtle in the organization. They have the charismatic leader that's self-appointed, dogmatic, unaccountable. What does this mean to you?
Doesn't have to explain.
You don't have to explain your actions.
Don't have to explain themselves. Well, what else might it mean?
No budget sheet for the congregation.
No budget sheet for the congregation. What else might it mean?
There's nobody above them.
Nobody above them.
You don't pay taxes.
Well, that's true if they're a religious group, right? What else? To me, what that means is when they're talking, they may not necessarily make sense to you. They may not make sense when they say one thing today and another thing tomorrow. Today they're your preacher, and tomorrow they're David Koriev, saying that he's Jesus. Unaccountable.
Yeah, you can't question him or
Or they say, I get to have all the wives I want and you don't get any.
Or you will be my wife whether you want to or not.
Yes.
Do they really believe what you're saying?
Well, that's an
The
interesting
people that are
question.
saying it, do they believe what you're saying?
That's a very interesting question. And I think what we would have to do is we'd have to look at case by case by case basis. Because I also believe that some of the people that are at the heart of these kinds of cults are mentally ill. And so whether or not they believe what they say or not, what their motives are shrouded in mystery. There's probably some that truly believe what they say. Are any of you familiar with Edward Casey?
I am.
Edward Casey. Okay. You remember he's talking about that. You remember he clear channeled from a spiritual being somewhere out there. He would have trances and he would speak like a biblical prophet, he would speak what the Spirit was saying. In a case like that, would you say that he believes what he's saying? He's more like a vessel, clear channeling a message from somewhere else. Now, whether or not you believe that's true is a different matter. That's why we live in a free country. Who are cult members? What kind of a person would belong to either any of these?
Gullible person.
How does this happen? America is particularly a good place for cults. And we have always had a lot of religious groups that are emerging, growing and emerging. And Jehovah's Witnesses is one, Mormons, Shakers. They're all religious groups that started and grew. And in the case of the Shakers, they died out. Does anybody remember why?
They only married from within, and they couldn't shake
Well, they
anymore.
couldn't marry.
No, they
They couldn't.
believed in celibacy. Oh, it's not a way to grow a church. So they literally died out.
That'd cut down on the population.
Yeah, but that also means that they were true believers, that they practiced what they believed. But the result was they went away.
And that's why they were such shifters.
Yes.
They could be, Bill. They could be. But Quakers and Mennonites and our Jewish friends came from other countries. Yes.
Do the Amish fall in this category?
I would think that the Amish would still fall in that category.
Yeah, that's.
Have you watched any of the stuff that's lately on TV, Breaking Amish, or any of the Amish? It is not a good thing to leave an Amish community.
But they don't have anybody in charge.
That's true. The Quakers are the same way. They don't have ministers.
Yeah.
But they're not particularly happy when you leave.
So two questions. Was Nixon Amish or Quaker?
Quaker.
And did he leave, or was he still a Quaker during the presidency?
I believe he was a Quaker during his presidency. One of the ways you get elected is to have a religious faith that you practice.
It's sort of
At least
like,
in this country. Yeah.
you know, like there's a lot of people who are Jewish, but they're not observant. He was a Quaker, but he was not an observant.
Not fanatical about it anyway.
Well, for that matter, Barack Obama is United Church of Christ. I don't know if you knew that. He is United Church of Christ. But as president, he attends a different house of worship almost every week. So that's another aspect that you have to do when you're president.
Yeah, Jeremiah Wright, who
was his pastor in Chicago.
Oh, that guy. He would almost qualify as a cult, wouldn't he?
No.
It's just
And his comments were taken out of context.
Oh, okay.
So,
I didn't follow him.
who are cult members? In the 1970s and 80s, we saw a lot of new religious groups coming into our country drawn from Eastern and Western religious traditions. Can you think of one that was brought to this country by a rock and roll group?
Very Christian.
Rock and roll group? What about the practices from India that the Beatles brought, not only in their music, but in their lifestyle, that influenced a lot of people to become interested in new religious groups in the United States. And then we start seeing, like the Hare Krishnas. And one of the things that we'll explore a little bit later is, when did some of these groups have to start up? It'll kind of give you a sense of history in putting things in context of how they flow. Because these religious groups were truly religious movements, they all needed to grow and to make converts, and they concentrated their conversion attempts on young, idealistic, mostly white, middle-class Americans. The young rock and roll generation, the Hare Krishnas, you look at that picture there, you're looking at Hare Krishnas, they're white, young, male, largely male there, but
Baby boomers.
Baby boomers, yep.
Having lived through that period, I know that among the Hindi element, and I will say most of us did not have a means of income. And so something like that appealed to someplace to go and have a place to crash and eat.
So part of what Jean is talking here about is the social aspects of belonging to a cult. Or for that matter, a church.
He's saying economic too.
Economic, yeah. But one of the things about belonging to a church is look around you. You're a social group as well as a religious group.
For some folks, it's more social than religious.
Yes. And for some folks, it's more religious than social. We know some of those people. Yes. So what I remember thinking, there are between 2 and 5 million young adults between the ages of 18 and 25 in cults today. In our country. That's a lot of people.
2,000 cult groups?
Oh, there are specific websites. There are groups that study cults, and one of the most sophisticated is a gentleman named Rick Ross. And if you go to his website, he has a list of cults that's it's amazing the number. And some are very, very small. Some are very, very large. Yes.
Isn't the main purpose of most cults are formed to evade taxes and become tax exempt?
No.
It isn't.
No. Most cults are formed for the purpose of spiritual development. These are religious cults, and they start out being interested in your soul, your immortal soul. Now, they may get perverse after that. When they start, by definition, if they're a religious cult, they start with the faith at the heart. Now, about these young people, Stacy, who put together these two churches, says nobody joins a cult. You are recruited one way or another. People join interesting groups that promise to fulfill your needs. A group becomes a destructive cult when it is deceptive, dangerous, and opposes basic values of society. So, for instance, we recruit you in, you come to our church service, and we recruit you in, and then we start cutting you off from your family and your friends, and isolating you. We all live in a compound in the woods in Montana. So we isolate you, and we won't let your family visit you. Oh, maybe once a year you can talk to them on the phone for 5 minutes. No. And that is opposing part of our basic values as Americans, right? We're a social country. We're a democratic country where everybody has a voice. How does some of this remind you of domestic violence?
Oh, yes.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
Controlling, isolating. One person has got the power. Coming from a base of it, perhaps, or mental illness, or something like that.
Well, if you want to go back to the Old Testament and live strictly Old Testament way of life, it kind of promotes that kind of a family structure.
It's an interesting thing that Jean just said. When you think about the New Testament and the early church that came after Jesus was resurrected, remember people lived in what we would today call communes. They shared everything. They shared food. They shared child-rearing responsibilities and wealth. They shared everything. Now, everyone is vulnerable to persuasion given the right circumstances. Every day we can find examples of persuasion, deceit, deception, and trickery working effectively in society. What's an example of that? Advertising. Advertising.
If your life is not going well, you don't have a good support system, you are a prime candidate.
Yes. Remember who Charlie Manson recruited was young, particularly women that were on the streets, that had no support group, that had low self-esteem. Those are moments in your life when you are vulnerable to persuasion. And if somebody is promising you heaven, that's a big deal. And the other side of that, think about it. I saw on television the other day about a young man who killed his fiancée. And the reason he killed his fiancée was that she came from outside his religious group. And one day when they were in church after the sermon, she asked the pastor some questions about what he had said in his sermon. And he threw them out of the church. He didn't answer the questions. He just said, go. You're not welcome. So what he lost in that moment was his entire support group. All his friends, his lifestyle, his worship center, and he was going to hell because he's no longer with them. That's formidable. That is a formidable way to keep you in the cult. You don't necessarily have to put concertina wire around the building. They get you with your thinking. Jesus said, beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Ye shall know them by their fruits. And I think that's the key to the whole thing. Ye shall know them by their fruits. They keep all the money for themselves, or they take all the wives for themselves, or whatever. Cindy, will you hand me one handout? I have a handout here. So now we're going to talk about specific cults. Well-known benign groups: Eckankar, Falun Gong, Hare Krishna, Sanskara, Satanism, Unification Church, which is sometimes known as the Mooney, and Wicca. Now Cindy is handing out a, I can't get it. Here. Thank you, Susan. Here, I'll help. And we'll hand them out. Oh. Thank you, Susan.
Robert,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're good, Robert.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
They're not there anymore.
They're not there anymore.
Grand Central Station.
If you'll take a look at this handout, has both destructive and benign groups in recent years. And let's start with the benign. And I've listed them here for you. The first one is Falun Gong, which is in China, was formed in 1992. This is largely a little bit like yoga. It's a meditation, it's a centering, but it has moral philosophy. The Chinese are persecuting the followers of Falun Gong right to extinction. Hare Krishnas, their beliefs are based on traditional Indian scriptures, as you were saying, Michael. They have a scripture. Falun Gong does not. They were formed in 1966. What was happening in 1966? Vietnam. What else? Civil rights.
Free love.
When did the Beatles have their first album?
64.
When were they on? And so on. 64, 65. And this comes right at the same time. Now, Eckankar, perhaps you've heard of Eckankar. There's an active, incidentally, here in Phoenix, if you go to the Oh, there's a ladder in front of them.
Yeah, the cable, don't pinch the cable, sorry.
Don't panic, there is Valley Youth Theater, little children having their summer thing, and they're about winding down, so that's why they're rather exuberant.
Let me go, I'll close it the best I can.
If you go to Valley Interfaith events here in Phoenix, you will meet people from these organizations, from the Hare Krishners, Ekankar, Wicca, Santierra. All of those people have active groups here in Phoenix. The Ekankar is one that I don't know very much about, formed by Paul Twitchell in '65, but it is a little bit like Scientology or religious science, which the center of their belief system is you have what you need within you. You are part of the universal consciousness, and you don't necessarily need a God per se, in the sense that we have a God.
You can find Ekankar rampant in Sedona.
In Sedona, Crystal said.
Oh, yes.
The Unification Church, which is the Moonies, it is interesting the way they began, which is that Sun Myung Moon, who recently died actually, Jesus appeared to him in 1935, and asked him to do the work that was left unfinished at the crucifixion. So Reverend Moon saw himself as completing the mission of Jesus. And you remember the Moonies, the first picture I had up was of one of their big mass weddings where they marry thousands of people at the same time. And the way you meet your intended is you stand in line and you come forward, and Reverend Moon says, you marry her. That's the courtship. And there he is. I've met a man here in Phoenix who was married that way a number of years ago, and he said it's worked out beautifully. It's been just fine. We're still members of the Unification Church, and they're living happily ever after. So this is a benign cult. This is an emerging religion, and we may not agree with it, but it's not necessarily hurting people.
Well, some of their practices were off the wall, but their belief system was really pretty traditional Christian teaching.
Yes, and one of the notable differences is that Reverend Moon drove a Rolls Royce. Let's remember he had a big house.
You don't believe that most of these groups are headed by one individual or a very few individuals that rake off almost all the money, and they live very like kings and queens, and most of them are tax exempt because they're nonprofit things or they're religious. I mean, that's the primary thing. Do you know any of the groups that have 4 leaders?
But that may not be the way they started. They started with a religious intent in mind, and in this case, he's finishing the work that Jesus left undone.
But somehow all the money that's contributed and everything ends up in their bank account.
That could be. It depends on the group and the organization. Wicca, for instance, which started in 1954, can be simply defined as witchcraft.
But it's white.
But it's white witchcraft.
White magic.
Yes. And actually, I knew a woman in seminary who was a practitioner of Wicca. Then we have Santierra, which is sometimes called Yorba. A lot of people think that Santierra is voodoo, but it's different. But it has similar origins in that the Africans that were enslaved and brought to the Caribbean created Yorba by bringing together Roman Catholic beliefs and their animalistic beliefs from the old world. And then there's Satanism. Satanism is a diverse group, and a shared feature is admiration for Satan as a liberating figure.
How do they qualify as benign? I mean, most of the satanic activity that I know about or have read about it is not good.
Well, what they do in society is not being measured here. What we're talking about is their relationship with their followers.
Oh, okay.
And if you can come and go out of Satanism, you're okay.
Yeah.
And you can read about their practices and their religious groups in many places.
Well, they have some real extreme groups too. They're
Yeah.
not every religion. Yeah.
But we might mention that the United Church of Christ has some extreme groups as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not necessarily above all this. The next slide is destructive cults. And somebody mentioned Jim Jones. Let me mention that I can tell you something you don't know, I'll bet you, about Jim Jones. Jim Jones was a ordained pastor in the Church of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, which is our sister denomination. And what happened there is that their organization is a lot like ours, which is Jesus is the head of the church. They have no organizational hierarchy. The congregation gets to decide who is their pastor and who is not. This is sounding like the United Church of Christ. And they have no body that can govern what happens in an individual congregation. Does any of this remind you about what happened here with Jared? There's no way for the conference minister in the United Church of Christ to say, Jim Jones, you're a lousy pastor, you're out of here. If the congregation wants to keep Jim Jones, that's what happens. And somewhere along the line, Jim went off track. And we can say he was mentally ill. We can say he was ego-centered, narcissistic, or whatever we want. But he went off the track, and we all know the sad story of what happened there.
And he took the congregation with him. That's why he was allowed to continue.
He took the congregation with him. And you know, when the General Synod voted for marriage equality in the United Church of Christ, a lot of churches left. Pastors took their congregations with them. Congregations went without their pastors. They left for other denominations. We're porous. And the same is true in their disciples. But let's take a look from the top here. In the year 2002, there's a very recent cult that's begun. It's a free love realism by Claude Horocom. It's a UFO religion.
Is this the one that believes the superstition mountains are hollow? Or is that?
Robert is asking if this is the group that believes the superstition mountains are hollow. My guess is no, because this is largely in Switzerland.
Oh, okay.
Although they could.
The UFO religion. Somebody from another planet's going to come in and...
Or if there's any luck, we'll all get to go.
I'll go.
You see, lucky. The next is a Japanese destructive cult that was responsible for the Saran attack in the subway that poisoned all the people in Japan.
Oh,
and perhaps you've seen their leader has long gray hair, tons of hair. The next is, of course, Al-Qaeda, which is extreme Islamic theology and terrorism.
That only came out in '88?
Yep.
Wow.
that's recent.
And then all of these are fairly recent, yes. And then the Order of the Solar Temple. And this is a Swiss, you may not have heard of this group, but this is a Swiss group, and they had mass suicides as well. How you talk somebody in to joining into a mass suicide is a mystery.
Yeah.
It's a mystery.
You're going to something better.
This is how you get to heaven.
Do you know how suicide became a cardinal sin? In the early church, when Christians were being persecuted and life was not good for Christians. And life in general was not good. There were wars, there were plagues, there was bandits. The world was not particularly a safe place for good people. Christianity preached that when you die, you go to a better place. You'll be with Jesus. You'll be with God. You'll be safe. You'll be in the arms of love, which we still believe today. But it sounded so much better than life here and now that people killed themselves. And the Catholic Church began to realize that they were losing revenue with suicide. And that's when suicide, you can research it, that's when suicide became a sin. You're supposed to stick it out, folks. Next is a Uganda cult. These are the top worst in the world, incidentally. Movements for the restoration of the Ten Commandments. That sounds pleasant, doesn't it? And this comes out of Roman Catholicism and has resulted in mass suicides of 1,000 people.
Probably came out of the missionaries that went over there.
Perhaps. Then there's the People's Temple, which is Jim Jones, which we just talked about. That was 1978. And then Heaven's Gate, and that's who that gentleman was with the wild eyes, Marshall Applewhite. Remember, the comet was going to come and take everybody to a better place. And so they killed themselves, and if you recall, some of them were also responsible for self-castration. They didn't learn anything. They didn't learn anything from the Shakers. That's a UFO religion. And then there's the Church of Bible Understanding, the Forever Family. And that is that the founder in 1971 claims to be the reincarnation of Elijah. Then I included the Manson family here just for chuckles. Because it gives you can see, though it's easy to see in these extreme groups the things that are wrong with it. It's a little harder in some of the others. The Church Universal and Triumphant, Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She was the other person that I pointed out earlier on the slide. New Age theology, and she is a doomsday cult. Now, I don't know if you remember her. She was on television for years and years and years. She did clear channeling of a spirit. And when she was at the pulpit, she talked like this. I don't know why anybody would believe her. And she was in a trance. She and her followers bought up land in the Pacific Northwest, and they decided that they were going to take over the nearby town politically. I don't know if you remember this. They're the ones that went into the buffet restaurants and the grocery stores and sprayed toxins on the food. Remember? You remember that? That's Elizabeth Clare Prophet's church.
Oh.
She's dead. I don't particularly recall if it was poison or disease.
Yeah, but whatever.
Whatever it was. She lost the election too, I'm not mentioning that. Then there's the Branch Davidians, and they are an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So they're an example, like Jim Jones, of an ordinary church going off track. And then there's the Westboro Baptist Church, Fred Phelps, and that's extreme Calvinist theology. Westboro Baptist Church is the church that pickets funerals and has all those signs that say God hates fags. Yeah. There's signs of what I would call unaccountable. They don't make sense. They are extreme Calvinist theology. I'm reading a book about them right now. It's quite interesting. Calvin believed in predestination. Before you were born, God decided whether or not you were going to heaven. And there's nothing you can do about it. And you won't know until you die which you're getting. Maybe that's good.
But don't they also, they pick at the military funerals?
They pick at military funerals.
Really?
They pick at practicing churches. They pick at big events like the presidential inauguration. Because in this country, protesters, if they get a permit and follow the rules, you can speak your mind, even if what you have to say is stupid.
And the interesting thing about them is that their focus is entirely on issues of sexual orientation.
They're almost entirely focused on homosexuality, yes.
I love the motorcycle, I don't want to say gangs, but groups.
Hells Angels.
Yeah, that go and block them. And at our Pride Parade, didn't we have the Sisters of the whatever holding up banners?
Every year.
At the very end, every year.
What did their banners say, do you remember?
It was to block the Westboro people.
Oh.
They held up banners so that
So you wouldn't have to read their sign.
Yeah,
somebody who was at Pride may have been able to explain that a little better than I, but
at the funeral of Matthew Shepard.
Matthew Shepard is one of their Talmuds, yes.
Yeah.
Talk about him all the time.
Yeah.
They say Matt is in hell. That's what some of their signs say.
And they ticketed his funeral, and I remember seeing on television, I was so impressed. That just a bunch of people in the community donned white sheets and stood in front of them like angels.
So you couldn't see their signs there.
Interesting.
Isn't the Presbyterian Church that they use? There are a lot of that's from Calvinism.
Calvinism is alive and well in this country, but well around the world for that matter. But this is they've taken it to the absolute extreme. You can take anything to the extreme and become hurtful.
But the Presbyterian Church has moved
The other way. Yes, of course.
pretty much away from a lot of that.
Predestination.
I'm not sure. I don't know enough about it. But I do know that you can show up at their church, and if you're coming because you want to worship, they will let you in. They have like our commercial, they have bouncers at the door of their church. But if you're coming to worship, you can come in. And if you're a reporter and you sincerely want to know more about them, they will talk to you. They will tell you about their beliefs. You can find their beliefs on the internet. So in that regard, they're a little slippery when we're talking about them being a destructive cult. When you leave, it's not so nice. And it is isolating. Yes, Lois.
The Westboro Baptist Church is a rather large family, and all of the kids are attorneys.
Yes, it's Fred
As I understand, there is one who left the family. But they do all sorts of things around the town. Now that's my hometown, and I can buy their compound and all that stuff.
They bought a city block a long time ago, and they bought the houses around it. And in the center is a green area where they have a park. But all of the houses around are church members, and so they do all their socializing together. And so in that regard, it's isolating. And to Lois's point, one of Fred Phelps' children left, said, I can't do this anymore. And his family had on, his mother had on the refrigerator, she had a huge number of kids, huge, all pictures of all the kids. And when he left, she took the picture down and closed up the hole, like he doesn't belong anymore.
They had a son and a male and a female. Both left the church.
Well, the woman that wrote the book that I'm reading now is not a member of the family.
Well, there is one.
There's a daughter that left as well. Having gotten that far in the book. Next on the list is Scientology. Today it's estimated that they have 20,000 members, although they will tell you they have a lot more than that. They have a new big church, down towards Chandler, down there somewhere. But L. Ron Hubbard had visions of what could be and what was truth, and wrote it down in his books. I don't know if you know anything about Scientology, but he thinks that a lot of the problems in the world today are the result of us not understanding our words clearly when we speak. I use a word like unaccountable, and to you it means one thing, and to you it means another thing, and that's the origin of all the wrong in the world today.
Science of the mind.
Yeah, science of the mind.
Does that mean everybody has to believe the same then?
It means everybody needs to study the meaning of words like night and day in Scientology, yes. And then finally I added Ku Klux Klan because to a certain extent I believe for them that religion and religious purity is part of their core beliefs.
Well, all of the white supremacist groups a biblical foundation to their beliefs.
So that brings us to the end, and here are some sources if you care to pursue any of this further. There's a lot of information on the internet about cults, both good and bad. And if you have any questions, I would suggest that you do a little research. It's interesting. But it tells us more about seeking. People that are seeking answers, and how people find answers, and how people leave and join organizations, and what's going on in the world today with emerging religions.
I wonder why Scientology is important. And the reason I'm asking is the Hubbard House is in my neighborhood, and it has historical designation. And the city of Phoenix helped with the restoration of the house. It's in the same condition it was when Hubbard lived there. Started Scientology. And the church, there's a brand new church on Indian School. On 44th Street, near Indian School. And that is just opening last year. And when you go by there, you'll find the personality. Test, right. Personality test. So they're trying to analysis. And the church is beautiful. And actually, the concept for Hubbard home is And anyway, I've gotten to be friends with a young woman who is a caretaker. Her husband is a caretaker.
Is she a Scientologist?
Yes. And she married into Scientology.
So they're extremely controlling.
So I should read this book.
I would suggest that you do. Part of what Michael was talking about too is the idea of you think of David Koresh, about how he kept his people up at night for long hours, studying, praying, reading, into the night, hour after hour after hour, as a way of breaking down your defenses, numbing your mind, and gaining control of your decision-making process. That's a big part of Scientology.
Tom Cruise and his wife have had terrible problems about how to raise their daughter, for instance. And she didn't want the daughter raised under that.
And, I suggest you read about it.
I know there's a new book out.
This is not to say there are not good people in any of these organizations.
One thing I know about Scientology is that there are different levels.
Yes.
And that you have to do a certain amount of studying and a certain amount of learning, and then you get promoted to another level.
Yes.
Don't forget the giving.
Yeah. And there's an expense structure to all of that. And then and there are very few people who ever get to the top level.
Yes.
And so there's where that discrepancy about how many people are members.
Yes.
There's that group up there, but I think there's for some people there's some positive aspects when you're on the lower level. One thing that I was going to mention that when you were talking about these people believe in what they're preaching, and when I was in practice, of course, I was coming across people that we would diagnose as having a sociopathic personality. And there are people in this world that can sit there and lie to you to your face, and at the time believe every word they're saying, or at least seem to believe every word they're saying.
Yes.
And when you're working with people like that, it's very difficult not to get sucked into their lives.
One of the things about Scientology is that their deity is from outer space, from another planet.
Well,
I can't remember the name of it.
I think you'll find the vast majority of the cults control you through your sex and through your money.
I would disagree with that, Michael. But we're coming up on time to eat lunch, so I don't want to get into it.
You don't want to talk about sex.
Is considered an established religion.
Oh, is it?
She's asking about Christian Scientists.
I thought it was like Scientology.
No, it's a different thing. It can be.
Died on the floor. She didn't go for cancer.
Yeah. Well, yeah. In human resources, I had an employee back east who apparently had Parkinson's, and they don't believe in medical treatment, and the belief that he had was that the reason he had this illness was that he wasn't faithful enough. That his prayers weren't strong.
You just pray, I'll be better.
Yes. So, speaking of praying, shall we pray for the minute?
Absolutely.
Dear and loving God, thank you for this opportunity to be together, to open our minds to different ways of thinking and believing. Thank you for being with us when we doubt, when we question, when we laugh, and when we cry. Bless this food and the people that made this food with love to the nourishment of our bodies. All of this we ask in the name of Jesus the Christ, our brother, our friend, and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Judy.
Okay. So anyway, you have been watching a meeting of the sages from First Congregational United Church of Christ. This has been a growing experience. We have started our podcast and we've had some interruptions because of signal strength. We've changed equipment, we've updated equipment. The podcast today is also new equipment. I'm actually using a laptop computer with an old-fashioned webcam. That's why it's a little bit pixelated, because in the olden days they didn't have fast signals for transmission, which we do have these days. Next event, probably next Sunday, we will be podcasting live again, and I will hopefully have a high-definition camera. So the signal that I can broadcast and the image that you receive will be much more improved. So anyway, thanks for joining us today. As always, go to www.phoenixucc.org to tune into a live podcast, and just click on the Watch Us Now button. And what else? Oh, I will get the PowerPoint presentations from Judy, and I will post them to the Digital Services UCC website at www.dsucc.org. And this video and the PowerPoint presentation will be available there. Again, thanks for joining us.